Hey people, welcome to the Run Testers and to our review of the Polar Girt X2. This is the long overdue update to the Girt X. It's a compact, rugged and more affordable alternative to the Girt X2 Pro. It packs the same suite of polar training, racing, navigation and recovery features as its stablemate and as the Vantage V3, along with a sapphire glass, AMOLED display, full colour maps, 30 hours of GPS battery life. We've been busy testing this since it launched a few months back and we are finally ready to give you our multi-tester verdict, in fact, on the Polar Girt X2. So watch on to find out what we made of it. So first up, let's give you a quick whistle stop of the key features and specs on the Polar Girt X2. Everything is more compact than the Girt X2 Pro. You've got a smaller 1.28-inch sapphire glass AMOLED touchscreen that's set in a more wrist-friendly 45mm frame with a stainless steel bezel, a plastic front and back casing. It weighs 62 grams, that's 17 grams lighter than the Girt X2 Pro, which has a stainless steel front case, but you get the same military grade durability rating. Though the Girt X2 is only water resistant to 50 meters, the Girt X2 Pro goes to 100 meters. You're getting faster processing than the original Girt X. You've got bigger storage, that's up to 32 gigs as well, mainly for the offline maps. Get the same optical heart rate and sensor setup as the Vantage V3 and the Girt X2 Pro, with Polar's 4th gen OHR sensor and Elixir with ECG smarts. There's also dual frequency GPS there. In terms of features, you're going to get identical firepower to the Girt X2 Pro. That includes everything from the full suite of Polar sleep tracking and coaching tools, Nightly Recharge, Recovery Pro, Training Load Pro, FitSpark, FuelWise, the Work Rest Guide, Vertical Speed, VAM, the full suite of fitness and recovery tests, and the navigation tools range from offline maps, Komoot and Strava, route syncing, track back to start, route guidance, and you've got Hill Splitter that kind of breaks down your efforts on the hill so you can see how you're performing on those. Basically, Polar is now making the choice here between its devices, sort of largely about being on the design build rather than the feature sets. Though when it comes to battery life, you do have varied endurance. The Girt X2 isn't quite up to the Girt X2 Pro staying power. On paper, you're going to get 30 hours of GPS tracking in performance training mode. That rises to 90 hours in the power-saving eco mode, roughly 7 days in smartwatch mode. By comparison, the Girt X2 Pro offers 43, 120 and 10 days in those settings. Now, this Girt X2 is available in two colours at launch. You've got night black and brown copper. It comes with a silicone band which can be swapped out for any standard 22mm watch strap as well. On price, the Girt X2 is going to come in at $399. There is no official US price yet, but converted we'd be looking at around kind of $500 to $550. That is significantly cheaper than the Girt X2 Pro and the Garmin Fenix 8, which starts at $999 or £879.
So, my likes with the Polar Girt X2 start with the design of the watch. Now, I'm a bit up and down the design. There are some dislikes to the design in general as well, but it is a pretty small and lightweight watch. And like, it's quite thick, which we'll talk about later, but in terms of the actual circumference of the screen, it does feel quite small and it sits on the wrist quite well. You've also got pretty good materials here with that sapphire screen, a lot of metal here. It feels like quite a premium product. And for the price, I think you are getting good materials. So yeah, that's a tick on the design front for sure. I think the all-round package for the price is actually pretty good in general as well. Like Polar's put all the features on this that you really need and more. There's offline maps, pretty solid training analysis. You are getting dual band GPS, all on the watch. Is £400. It's not cheap, but it is undercutting the biggest Garmin mid-range watch in the 4 570. Although there are options certainly from Suunto and Coros you could consider for less, but I do think it's worth the money. Polar's not always been spot on with its pricing, so I thought I'd include this here rather than just talking about the price in the verdict like we normally do. I do think the package here is coming in at a good price given the features you get it. I've also found throughout my testing that the accuracy has been pretty good. In the past, I found Polar's optical heart rate trackers in particular to be a bit hit and miss. It's been nearly all hit with the Polar Girt X2 when compared to a chest strap. Done lots and lots of runs comparing it to a chest strap, and I've never really seen noticeable errors. In the past, I nearly always had to pair Polar watches to chest straps quite early on to get some kind of half decent training analysis out of them. Could be that I've been testing it in a warm period here in the UK, which does make optical tracking a bit easier, but can't fault it on accuracy at all. Like, the optical tracking has been pretty good. GPS tracking has also been pretty good, very much in line with dual band tracks from other watches like the Garmin Forerunner 970. So yeah, I think that all adds to the package being a pretty solid value proposition. You are getting accurate tracking, you're getting a decent feature set, you are getting maps, all in a pretty nice design with some premium materials there that should ensure sure it's nice and durable.
So in terms of things I liked about the Polar Girt X2, I actually really like the design. I think if you value a watch, or particularly one that's very kind of outdoor centric, that doesn't feel like an outdoor watch, then I think that's what you get here with the Polar Girt X2. Now, you are missing a few things from the Pro. Still got a very nice looking watch here. As I said, it's not overtly kind of rugged and outdoor, but definitely has those qualities to make it kind of a good watch to be out, kind of, using in your adventures. The other thing that I think is good here is that actually you're getting pretty much all of the same hardware and software features as the Pro version of this watch. In general, it's given me, or has given me, a similar experience, and I think that's a good thing. You're getting it for less money than the Pro. And that GPS performance has been very solid when I've used it against other dual band watches like the Garmin Forerunner 970. The heart rate sensor, pretty much what I've seen on the Elixir sensor from other Polar watches, where steady paced kind of runs absolutely fine. Kind of high intensity runs, it's going to struggle a little bit more, and it's fine, but it's not fantastic. And I would pair a heart rate monitor chest strap if I was relying on that information. I think the training features are pretty good here as well. I still think it can improve in terms of that presentation on the watch, but I think in terms of understanding the kind of things in terms of recovery, in terms of your training load, better understanding and kind of managing those things. Also things like the FitSpark suggested workouts. Yeah, a lot to like from the hardware and software point of view. I think it's worth mentioning the mapping and navigation support here, which is pretty good, I would say, compared to other watches. What we're seeing from Garmin, what we're seeing from Sunto now as well. Also Coros, I think, Garmin kind of probably sits at that top in terms of functionality, in terms of performance, but I don't think the Polar is too far off. I think in terms of interacting with the maps, it's all very responsive and slick, and it doesn't feel like it lags as much as some of those other watches I mentioned in terms of their mapping support. Obviously it's a little bit fiddly getting those maps on initially, but once they're on, the navigation support is very good. You've got turn-by-turn navigation when you upload routes, and whether that's through things like Strava, whether that's through commutes, so you do have that support there as well. And the navigation experience is very good, nothing spectacular, but I think in terms of that delivery, it's solid overall, and you've got that breadcrumb kind of style navigation support as well if you're not uploading routes. So I think it's worth mentioning, that mapping and navigation support is very good. Pretty much identical to what you get on the Pro model, just on a smaller screen, which I don't think kind of restricts the kind of good experience you get from viewing those maps and actually kind of trying to find your way around too.
So starting off with the things that I enjoyed about the Polar Girt X2. Now, most outdoor watches come with big hench builds that don't really cater for those of us with smaller wrists. So it's refreshing, I think, to see Polar produce a product that packs the spec and top tier features and sort of premium materials of its heftier kind of adventure ready devices, but just puts it into a more accessible wearable form. It is still a bit thick, and that does somewhat detract from the sort of upside to having a smaller watch. But on the whole, I like the design. It's a good looking watch. You've got the tougher sapphire screen and the really teeny tiny bezel, which I think is quite fun. It's all well built, still packs that kind of rugged aesthetic, but just doesn't dominate the wrist like a lot of other adventure watches. And then I think the other thing is, I think the sort of fact you get a complete feature set in terms of what was available for Polar. From Polar's, this is a new thing from Polar's recent playbook, is this move to sort of bringing consistency to the feature set across its devices. So, you're sort of left to make a call between products in the lineup based on the size, the build, the materials, and the battery life. What it does is going to be the same. It's a shrewd move, I think, to also unite the platform so that any new feature updates will roll across the devices. So although you're paying less for the Girt X2, that doesn't mean that you're missing out on the best new tools. And if they stick to that Polar, I think it's a real positive for anyone who's looking to invest in a Polar watch, as it should come with some future proofing. It also makes it easier to choose your weapon from their lineup, I think. Something that Coros has done quite well. I think something that Garmin makes quite hard. It's quite hard to navigate Garmin's lineup to decide what's best for you. So what you're getting here is really quite a comprehensive set of features. Most of the things that you'll find on rival mid-range watches are present for training, recovery and health tracking, and for racing. Does lack some smartwatch smarts, but more on that in a mo. For me, it all adds up to a pretty good value proposition. It's sort of pretty smartly priced, quite a compelling offering for anyone who wants a good suite of tools with some premium design touches and a more wallet-friendly price. Then on to accuracy. I think it's another positive here. You've got the dual frequency GPS. In my test, it performed as well as pricier dual frequency rivals like the Garmin Forerunner 970, even the Fenix 8. When it comes to the overall distances, the Polar Girt X2 always had me within a margin for error versus those watches. Though when you dig into the tracks, in my tests, the Girt X2, it does have some wobbles. You know, you've got examples like this where Polar puts me through buildings, but then so did the other watches. And you can see here that, you know, neither Polar nor the Garmin Forerunner 970, for example, gets me on the footbridge. So, you know, none of the watches are infallible when it comes to that. And overall, the distances were pretty close. Then on heart rate, for many of my runs, the optical sensor was pretty close match for the chest strap I benchmarked it against, though it did again have the occasional problem, one complete stinker that I had. But generally speaking, I'd say the accuracy of the GPS and the heart rate was solid.
Dislikes with the Polar Girt X2. So we talked about what I liked about the design. What I don't like about the design is how thick it is. It is still a thick watch and it sticks out from the wrist a lot. And I appreciate they've made it quite small, but the fact it's so thick, you know, it lessens that effect quite a lot. So it still isn't that comfortable to wear on the wrist, even compared to bigger watches. Something like the Forerunner 970 is a bit thinner and it feels a bit, you know, nicer on the wrist to me. In general, if you're looking at the smaller mid-range watches, they're a bit thinner, they feel a bit lighter on the wrist than the Polar Girt X2. Obviously, the metal bezel gives it a bit of weight, but it's more just, you know, how thick it is. That's not a great feeling to have on the wrist sometimes, especially as it's marketed as a small watch for smaller wrists. Yeah, that thickness doesn't feel so good. And then just the general user experience of Polar just hasn't really moved on for a long time, and it feels quite dated. It's not the most enjoyable or intuitive watch to use. The way you work through menus sometimes is quite frustrating. The data isn't presented that much. You have to go into the app or the web app to get stuff sometimes, and yeah, it's not an easy experience, or as easy an experience as you get with other sports watches. I think it's definitely easier on Garmin. Coros has a simple but effective user interface that I think works pretty well, and Suunto's been, you know, making strides in cleaning up their one to make their watches more enjoyable to use. So have got a pretty nice AMOLED screen on this watch. I don't think it's quite as bright actually as the ones on the newest Garmins, things like the Forerunner 570, but it is a nice screen. But it's not a watch that's like a real treat to engage with as a daily driver to have on your wrist. The watch faces are very basic. The menus, you know, all the fonts and stuff, it doesn't appeal that much. And I think Polar could do a bit more to freshen this up. I know this has got the latest OS, but I haven't really seen, you know, significant changes there that make it a lot more fun to use. So I suppose my main two dislikes, it's just the user experience just isn't as good as with other watches. Like, you've got all the features here. You've got a good feature set here. You've got the maps. You've got decent training analysis. You've got decent tracking. But the actual user experience leaves something to be desired. And I think Polar could clean it up. It's simple things like the fact that you still can only show 4 data fields during any kind of activity, where every other watch allows you to show more. And the way sometimes you go through menus, you can't scroll all the way through. You have to go back to the top. So just overall, the day-to-day experience of using the watch, I think, is a little bit more annoying and less fun than with other watches. Even though it is a very good watch, it undermines itself with that experience, I think.
So in terms of dislikes, I wouldn't say there's anything I particularly disliked about my time with the Polar Girt X2. There has, I will say, been one particular software bug, which hopefully is isolated to my watch, because I don't think Kieran and Nick have had a similar issue. But aside from that, I think it's more things that I'm maybe a little bit disappointed about, and maybe more so disappointed that these particular features or experiences haven't evolved over my experience of, you know, other Polar watches that I've tested recently. And I think the first thing would be my experience of the Polar Flow app, which is, and you know, this isn't just a Polar issue. I think across the board with the sports watches from Garmin and Suunto as well, I found it's a little bit stuck in the past, that kind of desktop era of kind of looking at your data. And I still think it's a little bit busy. I still think the communication of some of the data and analysis, which obviously is good and useful, does need a little bit of work, just needs cleaning up, and I think just needs to feel a little bit more glanceable, a little bit easier to kind of take on board, because I think at the moment it just feels like a bit of an overload in terms of information in the app. And I know that there are changes happening, and obviously we've seen with the announcement of the Polar Loop that the Polar Flow app will be improving. And I think these are improvements that have needed to happen, and they will start to roll out. But in terms of my experience of that Polar Flow app during using the Girt X2, that's definitely something that's kind of irks me, I would say, in terms of living with the watch. Other thing I would probably talk about here, and you know, actually I don't necessarily want loads more smartwatch features, but I think just maybe refining them, making them more useful. And I think, you know, the fact that you're not getting new ones or enhanced ones on the Polar Girt X2 compared to the previous Girt watches, and kind of flagship Polar watches in general, I think I just like to have seen a little bit more on that front, just giving a little bit more on the smartwatch front, beyond the kind of, you know, the music controls and the notifications. Maybe just making the notification support just feel it works a little bit nicer. You know, it doesn't, I don't necessarily need to have payments and music plays and things like that, but just giving a little bit more to the user in terms of how useful this watch can be outside of tracking your run. So that was definitely one thing I definitely picked out. And I think the other thing would be, you know, the battery life is pretty good. I think day-to-day battery life, I think, you know, using the race to wake, always on, you know, it is shorter battery life in comparison to the Pro model. So you are losing out on that front. You compare it, the GPS battery life kind of numbers to similarly priced watches, actually competes pretty well on that front. I just think when you're using it always on display mode, if you choose to, and generally I do use the raise to wake, then, you know, there is going to be a drop, and probably compared to the other watches that sit at this price, when you are using those kind of always on display modes, I think you are going to just get a little bit more battery in general. So yeah, I didn't hate the battery life, but I do think, you know, I was hoping it maybe would be a little bit better, and obviously you do see a drop off from the Girt X2 Pro. Now, that software issue that I mentioned, as I said, I don't think this is something that Kieran and Nick have seen, but during a few of my runs, and I would say probably 3 or 4 runs, I have noticed where the watch has not displayed the distance for some reason. It does seem to capture all other metrics, but when I've looked down at that distance tracking, then there's nothing there, and I kind of synced it over, and, you know, it hasn't really recorded it. Now I've waited for that GPS signal, so I don't think that is an issue. So hopefully it's just a small kind of, as I say, kind of quirk with my version of the watch, but is worth mentioning here. If you do see something similar, it might be a case that there's a bug on a few of these watches. It's just something that I've experienced on my one during my time.
So moving on to the things that didn't quite work out as well for me, and in my tests the day-to-day battery burned pretty fast. In my first test with the always on screen switched off but the screen on full brightness, I'd got just 2 days with 3 hours of GPS training. In a second test I got closer to 4 days with slightly less GPS training. A 1 hour run using this burned on average around 5%, so most of the leaching happens outside of training. The overnight burn rate was a whopping 9 to 12% whilst I slept. So that was quite a way short of what I'd now expect from an adventure watch, even a compact one. Though you can now charge the watch while you're tracking with a power bank. It's not easy to do while running for obvious reasons, but it's not impossible if you really need to do it. Or in some circumstances that's quite handy, maybe like for a quick boost at an aid station where you don't want to take it off. Then I think there's the fact that this watch lacks many smartwatch smarts comparatively when you're putting it up against Garmin. Polar is like still a long way behind Garmin when it comes to kind of smartwatch and those daily life tools. Music on here is limited to music controls. There's no offline Spotify. You get notifications from a paired smartphone, but you can't respond to them. There's no contactless payments. There's no voice tools. It does have an alert if you've left your phone behind. But this thing drove me mad. It's so sensitive that it triggered if I left my phone downstairs in my house and came upstairs to go to the loo. Another thing, there's no front-facing flashlight here, which is now something that I think I demand on every watch. Something I didn't know I needed until Garmin put it there, now I want. Also, one gripe on the design, I'm not a huge fan of the strap. It's big and thick, it's quite chunky. I'll give it that, might be good for durability, but I found it all a bit rigid and not quite as comfortable as the softer silicone straps from some rivals. And I'd love to see Polar offer a nylon strap at purchase to give us the choice to make it a little bit more comfortable, get the fit in a bit better.
So the Polar Girt X2 I think is a good addition to the Polar range. On value, it is certainly a value option within the Polar range. You're getting lots of the features, pretty much all the features from the top watches at a pretty good price point in a smaller watch that, despite my reservations about how thick it is a smaller watch and it will fit on wrists a bit better. Got a nice bright AMOLED screen, you've got maps, everything's is there and works pretty well. The main gripes I have with it are, like I say, the user experience that isn't really been brought up to scratch, I think, compared to other watches out there, which does mean I think I'll be looking elsewhere myself. So the Garmin Forerunner 570 is their mid-range watch. It's a fair bit more expensive than the Polar. It doesn't have maps, but you have got a better user experience. You've got a nice design. It's nice to have on the wrist, and it will come down in sales to nearer this price, I'm sure, in time. But really, it's even older Garmins that I think are offering you better experience, especially if you want a smaller watch. You could look at things like the 265 or the Garmin Epix Pro 43mm watch, which is dropping quite substantially in sales at the moment, and you're just getting a much better all-round watch, I think, in terms of the features there and how well they work, especially if it comes to mapping with Garmin. So yeah, those would be a couple to consider. And I do think in terms of other brands, almost the best of the rest, who's doing it better than Polar at the moment, I do think both Suunto and Coros are. So the Pace Pro is not as nice as this watch in terms of design. It doesn't have that sapphire screen, the metal bezel and all that, but it's cheaper. The user interface is better. It's more fun to use, I find, just easier to use. You get a lot more data on things like training analysis on the watch itself, and it's a lighter watch as well, and a thinner one if you are looking for a smaller watch. But then if you do want those materials, things like metal bezel, sapphire screens, you can get them within the Suunto race watches, which are certainly really good value and in sales as well. I think actually looking at those Suunto and Coros watches, I think they're the bigger problem for Polar now than Garmin, because Garmin are very dominant in the sports watch market, and they do make loads of great watches, but they don't make them at very cheap prices, and they aren't great value. And so Coros, Polar and Suunto do have an opening to undercut them and make really good watches for slightly less, and I think Coros and Suunto are doing that a bit better than Polar at the moment. So it just means, although the Girt X2 is a perfectly good watch, it is an attractive watch, it does everything you kind of need it to and more, and does it all well. It just wouldn't be the watch I'd pick out of a little bunch of them. And I think it's something that Polar probably could address fairly easily if they focused a lot more on the software with their watches and really looked at improving that user experience. So that's hopefully something we'll see in the future.
So my take on the Polar Girt X2. Now, I'll admit to feeling a little bit underwhelmed about this watch when it landed and whether it was going to be hugely different from what we've already seen from Polar. But actually, having lived with it, tested it, kind of used it for my runs, actually, and you put it in the context of Polar's range, but also outside of its range, there is actually a lot to like here about the Girt X2. I think from a Polar point of view, you're getting most of those big features from the Girt X2 Pro in a more affordable package, in a smaller design, which I still think is really nice, despite not having those kind of more premium materials that you get on the Girt X2 Pro. Now, if you look outside of the Polar line, you've got things that are kind of similarly priced. So the Garmin Instinct 3, which is, it's a nice rugged watch, more overtly rugged, doesn't have maps, but maybe has a better kind of smartwatch and kind of training kind of ecosystem, or just presentation, maybe just slightly nicer, but you're getting a lot of those features here on the Girt X2. You've got things like the Garmin Chrono 570, which again doesn't have the same rugged qualities, doesn't have maps either, but again gives you a little bit more on that kind of training analysis and smartwatch front, but maybe not getting you as much battery life kind of, for GPS and in general. You've got things like the Suunto Race and the kind of Race 2, which is very well priced, again has a lot of the similar features and qualities to the Girt X2, but I think actually from a training analysis point of view, the Girt X2 offers a little bit more and just works a little bit better on their watch. And also something like the Coros Pace Pro, which is Coros's only kind of AMOLED kind of watch. Again, it's not going to be as rugged and durable as the Girt X2, but does have maps, does have some good training features, does have a generally good performance. So that software bug aside, which hopefully is just an isolated thing to my review unit, then I think what you are getting here is actually a very accomplished Polar watch. I think probably the best of those kind of top end Polar watches. And I think, if you don't care about those additional things I have spoken about with the Pro model, I think you're getting everything here for less money. I think it is very competitive against other similarly priced watches from Garmin, Suunto and Polar as well. As I mentioned, there are some strengths with those watches. And I think if you, value certain things from your running watch, from a performance point of view, from a battery life, and also just giving you enough on those kind of non-running features as well, then I think the Girt X2 will serve a lot of runners well.
Verdict then, the Girt X2 isn't a hold the front page product. There's nothing mind-blowingly new or revolutionary in the feature set. There's nothing particularly jaw-dropping about the design and the build. It's still relying on Polar Flow, which some might find a little less finessed and easy to navigate than rival apps like Garmin Connect or the platforms that you've got and the software from Garmin, Coros and co. But the devil can be in the detail with these things, and I like that Polar has delivered on something that we've been clamouring for a while, which is basically a well-featured map packing rugged watch that's just a bit more compact. This is undoubtedly a big step on from the Girt X of 5 years ago, and good for those looking for a compact rugged alternative that's friendlier to smaller wrists, a bit more kind of 24/7 wearable and at a more affordable price than many of the big rugged rivals. The shorter battery life is a big trade-off, and it's short on smartwatch smarts, but I think Polar has done a pretty good job here of delivering like a good hit of value in a watch that ticks a lot, if maybe not all, of the right boxes.